When it comes to re-releases, remasters, and remakes, the target audience can be divided into two categories: people who have played the original and people who have never played it. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition makes great strides in welcoming newcomers, and with the game's rough history in the US, it makes sense to target players who have never played the game yet. So if you've never played Xenoblade Chronicles before, welcome. You've likely heard of how many regard the game as one of the best JRPGs of the 2010s. Tetsuya Takahashi is the executive director and writer for Xenoblade as well as the Xenosaga games. In the past, he's also worked on graphic design and direction for a number of early Squaresoft JRPGs. Now, Takahashi has done a number of key interviews that are all thankfully pretty concise and offer a glimpse into the development of each version of the game, so his name will be coming up a lot here. Xenoblade Chronicles can be found on 3 consoles: the Wii, 3DS, and Switch. We'll take a look at the history of the game, what each version has to offer, and how Definitive Edition came to be dubbed Definitive. Xenoblade released in Japan in 2010, Europe in 2011, and the US in 2012. Like me, even as an avid Nintendo fan, if you were in the US, your first exposure to Shulk may have been his inclusion in Smash. You may not have known where he was even from, but that's okay. Nintendo of America was strangely adamant about not localizing Xenoblade, and when the game finally did come around to being released in the US, Nintendo of America used Nintendo of Europe's localization. Nintendo of America had barred the game from being shown at E3, giving way to the idea that the game may not see a North American release. A fan campaign started known as Operation Rainfall, which had the goal of raising awareness for Xenoblade, The Last Story, and Pandora's Tower, 3 Wii exclusive JRPGs. After much campaigning, all 3 games, including Xenoblade, were finally coming to North America, but Xenoblade was only to be sold exclusively at GameStop and the Nintendo store in New York City. Now, when you saw how Shulk looked in his own game, you may have been taken aback compared to his Smash appearance. Monolith is no stranger to making compromises for their vision. Xenoblade pushed the Wii hardware to its limits in order to achieve its staggering wide landscapes. The game runs at 480p and achieves a mostly stable 30 FPS, but it did have dips throughout, mostly during combat. That's speaking for North America, of course. On a PAL Wii, the game runs at 576i and 25 FPS, and because of the 50-60 Hz difference between NA/JP and PAL, there's a few oddities. For example, the game loads faster on NTSC and JP, but you move faster on PAL hardware. Takahashi stated that the localization process included bug fixes, minor gameplay balance adjustments, and slight rewrites, so nothing too substantial. Now, getting a hold of the original Wii version in the US may be costly given its limited release. Additionally, Xenoblade is a dual-layer disc game, so some Wiis may not be able to read it without cleaning the lens first. Additionally, on Wii, your only controller options are the Wiimote and Nunchuck combo, or Classic Controller/Classic Controller Pro. If you've got a Wii U though, you're in luck. Not only is the game on the Wii U eShop, but it supports gamepad play and even loads faster, making the Wii U version the more accessible and affordable version of the original to get your hands on, as well as pseudo-portable. Xenoblade released on the new 3DS in April 2015 worldwide. The port was developed by Monster Games while Monolith were working on Xenoblade Chronicles X. Monster Games was also responsible for Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D, so they had some experience on this front. The 3DS was an odd choice, but the reason for it was for portability's sake along with having the option for 3D, making it ideal at the time for those that wanted that experience. Once again, Xenoblade is pushing hardware to its limits, so much so that Monster Games knew the original 3DS was not gonna cut it. Fortunately, in comes the new 3DS, finally boasting the power to make the port possible. Because of the power needed though, Xenoblade Chronicles 3D is exclusive to the new 3DS. This doesn't mean more compromises weren't made either. Monster Games went into detail about their process with Game Informer. They learned from DKC Returns 3D that they should prioritize gameplay logic and focus on graphics, performance, and stability after it was just functionally playable. And then even later came the new features. Pulling right from the Game Informer interview here, they had to design a new graphics engine with a custom visibility culling system and a complex LOD system. As for the art assets, all the worlds were rebuilt and optimized while keeping the same look and feel. One location in particular that was pretty late into the game had to be redone several times over due to how high poly it was. Additionally, there's no dual audio option anymore, slower loading, and there aren't actually any bug fixes, as Monster Games focused on the new bugs introduced during the porting process first and foremost. Now, the UI can mostly be found on the bottom screen, making it a tad more intuitive and slightly cleaned up, but overall remained faithful to the original game's UI design. And thanks to the new 3DS's extra buttons, the control scheme is identical to that of the classic controller on Wii. In terms of new content, the 3DS version features an exclusive collection mode not found elsewhere. This mode included a model viewer and a music player, where you could listen to the tracks if you had headphones plugged in and close the 3DS. Models were made available by progressing the story, and you spent tokens in a raffle to unlock models and music. A few achievements would reward tokens, but the primary ways of getting them were through the Shulk amiibo, Street Pass, or Play Coins. Now, if you're considering the 3DS version, price may be another issue as it still comes new at $40. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition released simultaneously worldwide May 29, 2020. This time, the port was handled in-house at Monolith, but it was given a limited budget and time frame, as they're still working on their next title. At this time, Monolith has made 2 more Xenoblade games since the first, and with the added experience under their belt, they brought a lot of changes found in those games into Definitive Edition, as well as changes to bring some consistency between the games. Definitive Edition introduces an event viewer that lets you replay cutscenes, time attack challenges that enable you to, later in the game, purchase new armor and rarer materials that you'd otherwise have to find, and an extra epilogue scenario known as Futures Connected, which takes place on the Biona's shoulder that was cut from the original game. This isn't as substantial as Torna was for Xenoblade 2, which was a paid expansion. It's not as long, it doesn't change gameplay as radically. When it comes to gameplay changes, we'll start with the quality of life improvements. These include autosaves, auto-run, a map overlay, additional system options such as individual volume sliders, more time for QTEs in battles, and vanity slots for equipment. Definitive Edition adds an additional difficulty mode known as Casual Mode, and then something separate known as Expert Mode. When Casual Mode is enabled, you do more damage, take less damage, have increased party gauge, take less spike damage, and spike debuffs are reduced. And level has no effect on evasion anymore unless it's an enemy attacking you while they're under your level. On the other hand, Expert Mode is a way to manually change your party's levels and save XP. When enabled, XP from exploration and side quests are stored rather than given. Now, the reason you may do this is to prevent your party from being overleveled from doing side quests, since the game has 449 of them. The most significant difference that you've probably already noticed is the radical change in art style, making it more consistent with the style of Xenoblade 2. The art style can be subjective for some in what they prefer, but these new models in Definitive Edition are far more expressive and emotive than before. The game gets pretty emotional, so the detail of emotion benefits it in the long run. When Takahashi was talking about the game's limited time frame and budget, he mentioned it in regards to which assets were going to receive simple texture upgrades and which would be remodeled from scratch. Weapons, equipment, enemies, and maps got upgraded textures or new textures to work with the new shaders, while player characters, parts of other important characters such as their faces and hands, the Monado, new equipment to Definitive Edition, and facial animations in cutscenes and scripted animations were remade from scratch.
Ryan, what are you doing? Shulk, no,
No, Isel! Do you really expect me to leave you, run away and save myself?
Meanwhile, some of the staff did extra work on retouching a handful of NPCs and enemies. If you've played Xenoblade Chronicles 2 before, you'll notice that Definitive Edition feels similar. The game didn't just receive a massive visual overhaul, it's actually running on Xenoblade 2's engine. So movement and camera controls feel tighter, physics are pretty different, and some other nuances are different, like how weather works. And many glitches from the original, including those that utilized clipping and the auto attack damage glitch, were fixed, though new clipping glitches are being found. We know from data mining that the game runs at 504 to 720p when docked and 378 to 540p undocked. The scaling depends on the complexity of what's going on screen, though cutscenes work a bit independently of this so that they can look better. Like Xenoblade 2, the game has a filter for the scaled resolution, but it's not as aggressive as it was there. The frame rate is largely consistent. Through my time playing, I found that the frame rate does dip in some intense areas such as Magna Forest, and is usually when you're moving forward, but seldom does it drop frames in combat. Now, I've been most excited to talk about Definitive Edition's massive overhaul of the UI. Takahashi stated that the goal of redesigning the UI was to encourage players to not give up or miss anything. The UI has a bit of a different style to it, but it is an upgrade in both form and function. information is far clearer and properly organized on every front. UI in battle signifies with an exclamation point when it's ideal to use certain attacks given the situation. This is a great addition. New players will be constantly keyed in on how they should be playing, and more experienced players will be able to utilize position-based moves much more consistently. Side quests now show up on the map, both their start and their steps. This makes doing them far more accessible and easier to manage, which in return warrants expert mode further. The only issue I can see with this is if you don't plan to do side quests, the markers can't be turned off, so it's a bit of UI clutter that may annoy you. At the very least, I think they're worth picking up and doing if they're along your path. The navigation UI in Definitive Edition is the best Monolith has done so far. The compass and UI in the original Xenoblade and Xenoblade 2 could be unreliable, inconsistent, and sometimes just weren't there. Definitive Edition shows a dotted path towards your marked objective, and you can track any side quest or main quest objective. Menu UI is much more appropriately organized, making managing equipment, skills, and such much easier. And sorting items is more efficient thanks to the introduction of filtering and favoriting items, and these things even make shopping easier. Additionally, Colony 6 Reconstruction is conveniently found on the quest log screen. All of these UI changes and additions make for a far more accessible experience and are invaluable to newcomers. Definitive Edition comes with both original and rearranged soundtrack options, and you can set them independently for field or for battle. Not every track was actually rearranged, but a good handful of classics and more important tracks were. The rest were simply remasters of their original recordings. Additionally, some tracks that had to match up to cutscene moments weren't rearranged as to not ruin the timing of them. The one exception was, of course, engaging the enemy. Xenoblade Chronicles is a long game. Your choice of platform can be pretty important as you don't want to get so far into it and then wish you started on another version. With this look at all of the versions and their histories still comes some subjective preferences. The game does harken back to PS2 era JRPGs, and that seriously may be the look some people prefer even if it lacks detail. I think, personally, based solely on graphics, if I only had a smaller CRT, I'd go with the original, but on a larger TV, I'd stick to Definitive. But we really cannot undermine how important all of the changes Definitive Edition brings are, regardless of visual preference. There are a ton of quality of life changes made in Definitive Edition that can seal the deal for many who may otherwise have trouble committing to the game. That's all I've got for this video. A special thank you to chuggaaconroy for providing high quality 3DS footage, and to the Xeno speedrunning community for documenting some differences I mentioned here. If you want to support me, you can find me on Patreon, and if you want to keep up to date on projects, then follow me on Twitter. Till next time, thank you for watching.